presidential party flew back to Washington as Dean began to tell the prosecutors how the White House had obstructed justice. Nixon and Haldeman didn't know exactly what Dean was revealing, but they feared he might sink the cover-up and the administration with it.
We were going through all kinds of things about how do you get this back on the track where it belongs. I mean, containment had fallen apart.
Back in the Oval Office, Nixon held a crisis meeting. A new scapegoat had to be found. Campaign chairman John Mitchell seemed the logical choice, but he was the president's closest political friend. To persuade Mitchell to fall on his sword, Ehrlichman rehearsed the line someone would have to put to him.
The president strongly feels that the only way that this thing can end up being even a little net plus for the administration is for you to go in and voluntarily make a statement. I am both morally and legally responsible. Yeah.
And then there was a great choosing up of sides as to who was going to do that. And Nixon kept saying, well, it should be somebody who's very familiar with the facts. Well, I didn't get it at first, but what he was doing was pointing at me.
Got it.
So Haldeman called him, and Mitchell arrived at my office. And I said, all trails lead back to you, and the president and I feel strongly that you've got to come forward and protect him. And Mitchell puffed on his pipe and looked at me like I was out of my mind.
There's no question about it. The White House doesn't, as I understand it, have anything to come clean about.
John Mitchell's wife, Martha, was less discreet.
My husband has done everything to protect Mr. President. They have all let him down. They have all gotten away from the good people.
You mean let Mr. Nixon down or let Mr. Mitchell down?
Mr. Mitchell has become the fall guy.
What does she mean when she says they're trying to hang you?
I don't know. You'll have to ask her that. If anybody's trying to hang me, I'd like to know about it.
That afternoon, Mitchell's former deputy killed off the idea of a single scapegoat. Jeb Magruder went to the prosecutors and corroborated John Dean's story.
They realized that it wasn't just Jeb and John Dean and Gordon Liddy, it was John Mitchell, it was Bob Haldeman, it was, half the people in the White House and at the committee to re-elect, and maybe even the President of the United States.
We had got to the point where we were just sitting on a keg of dynamite, and we concluded that we had no choice other than to tell Henry Peterson.
Peterson, the man in charge of the Justice Department's prosecutors, briefed the president the next day.
I remember Henry Peterson coming in on that Sunday afternoon. He gave me a piece of paper indicating that they had knowledge of Haldeman's participation and they had knowledge of Ehrlichman's participation.
My position was that I can't guarantee you that we have a criminal case at this point, but I can guarantee you that these people are going to be a massive source of embarrassment to the presidency.
And he said, Mr. President, these men have got to resign. You've got to fire them. And I said to him, but Henry, I can't fire men simply on the basis of charges.
Nixon went sailing on the presidential yacht to consider how to break the news to Haldeman and Ehrlichman. He knew they wouldn't go without a struggle.
My feeling was that there were no grounds for kicking me out.
We really devoted 100% of our time to Watergate. What should we do? Should we resign? Should we take leaves of absence?
Tortuous, long sessions. You got hours and hours of talks with them, which they resisted. We don't need to go through all that agony.
Somewhere along the line in there, Easter Sunday came along, and the president went to Key Biscayne. First time I hadn't gone with him to Key Biscayne for Easter. It became more and more evident that the chances of our being cleared were getting slimmer and slimmer.
Their fate was sealed when the secret Nixon had been prepared to pay $1 million to protect came out. John Dean's lawyer led the prosecutors to the evidence.
Charlie Schaffer said, "Oh, by the way, there's something further that you might be interested in knowing that my client can tell you." And then he turned to Mr. Dean and said, "Tell him, John."
I explained to them that they had in their files information that was evidence of a break-in and a burglary of Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office.
We had this picture. It showed parking spaces with the names of people on the parking spaces. It didn't make any sense to us. And we said, what in the world is that all about?
They were photocopies of snapshots Howard Hunt had taken at the psychiatrist's office. The CIA, who developed them for Hunt, had passed them on to the prosecutors with no explanation. Dean revealed what they were, evidence that Watergate was just one in a series of White House crimes.
Earl Silber immediately recognized the significance, and his mandible or jaw just dropped open, and he got right quiet.
The next morning, Henry Peterson received a memo from Silbert. He went to the president with the news that 2 White House employees had burglarized a doctor's office.
And the president said, when I told him, "I know about that. That's a national security matter. You stay out of that."
Nixon had been going to extraordinary lengths to get Ellsberg convicted. 10 days earlier, Ehrlichman brought the judge in Ellsberg's trial to San Clemente. Haldeman's camera intruded on an encounter that was meant to stay private. The president told the judge he'd like to make him the director of the FBI, once the Ellsberg trial was over, of course. But all Nixon's efforts came to nothing. Peterson did put the evidence of the Ellsberg break-in before the judge, who made it public. Now Ehrlichman, who had authorized the Ellsberg operation, was bound to be put on trial. The president could hesitate no longer.
I got a call from the president from Camp David, and the White House operator got me on the phone, and there was a long, long delay before finally the president came on in a very muffled, downbeat voice and said, "I was wondering if you could get up here at 1:30 today."
Bob Haldeman called me and said, "The president wants to see us." I said, "What's up?" He says he's decided to fire us.
It would take all Nixon's political skills to persuade the 2 men who knew his guilty secrets to sacrifice themselves to save him.
Haldeman came in first. He's standing as he usually does. Not a dramatic Nazi stormtrooper, but just a decent, respected, crew-cut guy. That's the way Haldeman was.
Even while he was being sacked, Haldeman took notes.
The president said, "Let's go out and look at the tulips. I may not be alive much longer, so I've got to enjoy duty while I can."
Nixon had let Haldeman know he even intended to resign himself.
I said, "You can't resign. You've got to stay as president." And he said, "Well, Ehrlichman thinks that I should." He was really concerned because he thinks that Ehrlichman wants him to admit that he ordered illegal acts.
Seeing his president so overwrought, the chief of staff loyally agreed to go.
Ehrlichman then came in, and I took Ehrlichman out on the porch at Aspen.
And we stood there. We didn't sit down. He said, "I guess Bob's told you why I wanted you to come." I said, "Yes."
I could just hardly bring myself to tell Ehrlichman that he had to go, because I knew he was going to resist it. I said, "You know, John, when I went to bed last night," he said, I hoped, I almost prayed I wouldn't wake up this morning."
And he began to sob. And I put my arm around his shoulder. At that point, I was feeling more sorry for him than I was for myself. He was evidencing great distress. And he turned and walked out of the room.